Welcome to the Reaching Up podcast. I'm Ron Farris.
And I'm Daniel Locke.
And Daniel, we were talking last week when we left off about manhood. Remember that?
Absolutely.
So do we have anything else to say about manhood this week, do you think?
I think we've got a few things. Yeah.
All right, well, let's recap a little bit. So last week we were talking about the way that we see manhood in ourselves and the way that we think God maybe viewed manhood when he created men to be more or less a conceptual framework that really encompasses a whole lot of things. We talked last week about physical strength and endurance and courage and bravery. We talked about independence and self-sufficiency, and we talked, I think, about emotional resilience, and we sort of left off there. So last week we were sort of saying that, God expects men to be more than just, brutes in the world. And you want to lead us off on continuing our conversation about emotional resilience. What does it mean to deal with emotions as a man?
Yeah, so I think this is something that I've learned a lot recently on as well of not being. So I think we use the example of Rocky as being someone who isolated himself, worked a lot by himself, and then did this incredible thing. And so I think myself, I've thought of that for a long time. Okay, you do all these things in isolation and you do it all independently, and that's how you build character, that's how you build strength. Well, whatever it is, it's all done in isolation, and that's such a poor way to do it. And I think it's a poor example. I don't think that's the example that Jesus gave us. So I don't know. I think I wanted us to go into that a little bit more as you were talking about it. What does it look like in your own life, I guess, when you are doing it well? Because a lot of times we don't do it well. So what does it look like for you when you're doing it well, when you're demonstrating strength, you're demonstrating that you can control your emotions. They're not something we should be afraid of or we should avoid, but it's something that you are exhibiting well. What does that look like for you, I guess?
Well, short answer, I look like Christ, and this is going to sound a little hokey, but at this stage in my spiritual walk as a man, when I walk into a room or into a courtroom like I will later today, or when I walk into a meeting of friends or into a church or into a restaurant or any other place, I try to remind myself that I want to be the sweet smell of Christ in that room. Because at the end of the day, I think part of my role as a man is to be Christ-like. Christ was a man. He was God-made man. And so, we have his life to study, and, the things that he exhibited in his life, were not overpowering anger and, rage and, brute force. Christ spoke very precisely. He loved other people. He loved everyone in his path. He was always mostly kind and gentle, except with hypocrites, and he didn't like hypocrisy at all. Neither do I. I don't tolerate hypocrisy well at all, and I really strive hard, more now than ever, to avoid being a hypocrite. So I'm careful how I speak. I'm careful what I say. I'm careful how I act toward other people, and an example of that would be like in a restaurant. When I walk into a restaurant to order food, I'm amazed and my son's a waiter at a large restaurant in Denver, Colorado. So you would be amazed. We all, if we really stop and think, would be amazed at how rude people can be to folks who are serving them. Christ said that we're to be servants of other people. We're to lay down our life for our friends, and so as a man, I don't think I'm any less of a man because I choose to put your interests ahead of mine. And I think that's a very Christ-like thing. So, that's sort of a baseline. It plays out in a lot of different ways in the specifics, but like my example, like I go into a restaurant, I'm not going to be that guy who is, just a very rude, needy person wanting everyone to suck up to me. I'm there because I want to enjoy myself with whoever I'm with, or by myself, if that's what it is. I want to enjoy the experience, and I want to make sure that waiter, for instance, or waitress, enjoys the experience just as much, that they're glad that I came in, that they feel edified, or that their life's been enhanced some way by their interaction with me. And I think if more of us did that, the world would be a very different place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So going along with that, so I'd love there are examples, especially in all in the New Testament, about how Jesus demonstrated strong emotions, right? And so sometimes if we've dealt with strong emotions, maybe in our past, maybe a parent, maybe like a boss, something like that, we can be uncomfortable with strong emotions and either avoid them, assuming they're all bad, um, or really just being uncomfortable with them. So with that example, there's examples when Jesus cries, like absolutely cries when Lazarus dies, right? It's the shortest verse in the Bible. When I was growing up, my parents would have me write down verses, and I would always like use that verse because that would count as a verse,
You and millions
even
of
though it
others,
was
yeah.
like I think it's John 11:35. It says Jesus wept, right?
That's
And
right.
so let's think about one thing that usually men do not do. We don't cry. And Jesus wept. He felt so strongly about this person. He loved this person, and he was able to weep.
Hmm.
And then when we see the example, and we'll see the other end of Jesus's anger, right? When he goes into the temple. And it wasn't a gentle thing. Like he took time to fashion a whip. He overturned the table. He drove people out.
Hmm.
He wasn't the steward of the temple. He was just a guy who was coming in. Nobody knew. And he cared so much about his father's house
Hmm.
that he exhibited anger in that way, but did not sin. So I think I want us to talk a little bit also about anger. So a lot of times, so I learned this from my wife, that anger is a secondary emotion. Anger's not you're not angry because you're angry.
Hmm.
You're angry because you're embarrassed, or a lot of times you're afraid. You're not sure of yourself, but fear is a strong force for anger. But anger is a secondary emotion. So let's talk a little bit about how Jesus was able to show a righteous anger, as people call it. And people mislabel their anger. They say, I had a righteous anger. It's like, no, you didn't. You had rage.
Hmm.
For another reason, you were embarrassed. Whatever reason. Let's talk a little bit about how Jesus was able to do it perfectly and how we can be
Yeah, that's a great one
similar.
because a lot of men that I know struggle with anger. I ran into a guy just last week that I remember said he was, not really happy about having to go to he was angry about having to go to his anger management classes. But and there's a lot of that, but yeah, so righteous anger. So I think we're very safe to say that Jesus demonstrated righteous anger because basically everything Jesus did had to be righteous, right? And like you said, he did it without sin, and by that we mean that you and I fully believe that Christ was God, but that he was a man and that he was capable of sinning. In fact, the Bible says that Christ was tempted in all points like we are, yet without sin. So I do think that anger is a temptation, just like anything else. It does spring up in me, and I'll say this: as a man, I think a lot of men that I've known through the years do not understand their own emotions. They have no idea when they're angry. You hear the word frustrated a lot. Oh, I'm frustrated. Frustrated is really just truly anger, right? So you won't hear me say I'm frustrated. You'll hear me say, well, I'm angry about this, because then I'm honest about the fact that I'm experiencing anger. And, most of the time anger is not justified. Now there are times if you're attacking someone I love, if you're attacking, some other person that I feel, like I need to intervene, then I may move in anger, and there's some adrenaline in that and all of this that's going on. It's a physical process. But the Bible tells us that we are to be in control of our emotions, that we are to command ourselves in front of other people and to behave responsibly. And anger is no excuse. Anger is natural. It is a natural reaction. And by that, I mean sort of the rush of adrenaline that you get. It's a physical thing, when something happens that you didn't expect or something happens that you did not want to happen. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think that's righteous anger just because you're angry because you didn't get your way. That's not it. That's not it. But when Jesus got angry in the temple, he was angry because as Isaiah had prophesied, 1,000 years before it happened, he was consumed with zeal for his Father's house. He saw all these people in the church, in the temple there at Jerusalem, which was a holy place, a place of prayer, a place of sacrifice, a place where you went to solely to worship God. That was the only reason you'd be there. He looked around and there were all these people selling all of this livestock and stuff so that people would have it, to use in the temple for their sacrifice. And he was just consumed with anger Righteous anger, yes, because they were abusing, what the house of God was for. Today, we don't have the temple. The temple's gone now. It's been gone since 70 AD. Actually, it went out of business when Jesus, was crucified. But you and I are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so there's no place for anger within us unless it is truly justifiable, righteous anger. And I do believe that God has those moments. I think they're fairly rare in a good life where we have the right to be angry. I get angry when I see other people abused. When I see someone, being rude, I get angry. But I tend to control that, and a lot of times I have to talk to myself and say, Ryan, that's not your lane. That's, they can handle it, or whatever. But I think we all, when we walk with God, I absolutely believe that we know when our anger is justified, when it is righteous. And I think that in those moments, God will actually give us guidance on what to do. Because it's not just being angry, when the thing is, you're in trouble with anger is what you do, what you say, or what you actually do. I'm sure there's some good Christian men out there who have laid into somebody, with fisticuffs. And, that should never happen unless it is in a very rare circumstance where I think someone is in need of defense. They're being abused in some way. And then I think we absolutely should go in and help them. And, I'm sure anger will be an element of that. It's a very emotional experience. What about you? How do you handle anger?
Not well for a long time. But I think as of recently, I've been able to understand that it is the check engine light of my heart. It's when I know if there's anger, instead of me just being angry and looking for ways to do, I don't know, looking for outlets to try to healthy outlets for that anger. I'm going back to all right, why is there anger? Right. And that's helped me so much. Is it because I'm embarrassed? Do I feel disrespected because of how this person treated me? Right. Am I fearful about a situation? Am I embarrassed, or am I afraid of being embarrassed? And so I have this anger. So I'm using it now as okay, if I'm angry, there's a reason for it. And if I'm not honest about that, I'm just going to be angry, and then I'm going to hurt people around me and make excuses for myself like I have before. So that's how I've tried to go about it, especially with anger, and we can talk about, there's a lot of emotions and just like you said, I don't think we understand those well, and we don't know how to show those to other people in a healthy way, because if we don't understand it, how are we going to be able to do it in a healthy way? So I think, and leading into that kind of leads us into our next part of kind of what, if you think of manhood, you think, okay, leadership. Let's think of the man's man, the leader. I think of it as you think of the Marine Corps, right? All those guys are men's men who no one would doubt their manhood. And then you go, all right, who's the man's man of the Marine Corps? Then it's going to be the guy who's in charge of the Marines, the squad leader, whoever it is. He's going to be the guy. So if we could go into this idea of leadership, then if we understand it well, it's not just providing guidance to a group, right? It's what are the qualities of a leader. And as I was thinking about this, the verse that came to mind is something we even went over Tuesday night in our Bible study class, but it's 1 Corinthians 11:1. And Paul's talking, he's like, and it's a short verse, but in between chapters it says, imitate me as I also imitate Christ. And so, I don't know, what do you see when we think about leadership in men? What do we see people say it is as opposed to what Christ demonstrated it to be?
Well, great question. Before we leave anger, though, I want to say one thing. Okay. We'll dedicate a whole episode, at least one, to anger, because a lot of people deal with anger. I just got a ticket in Louisiana when I went home to see my one of my sons for the holidays, and to get out of the ticket without paying. Well, I had to pay for the class, but it didn't go on my insurance, and in that class, they had a whole segment on road rage. I think we could have a whole episode just on road rage.
Probably.
There are a lot of men who struggle with that. But to your point that you're talking about, so emulating Christ, yes, is one thing. And that verse really means. I think that verse goes to the heart of it. At the end of the day, everything I do, I measure by the standard that Christ set, because he showed perfect love. He showed perfect self-control. He showed perfect, use of wisdom. He showed perfect interaction with other people. He was our great example of how it should be done. And being God, he certainly knew what a man should look like, because he was there when God created the first man. What you're talking about in terms of leadership is true for anybody, male or female. But a man is expected, I think, by virtue of the way that God has ordered the universe, to always demonstrate leadership in everything that they do, and so are women in the roles that they assume in the course of living life. We all are leaders at one time or another. But to me, leadership means that I set an example, first of all. Lead by example. I can sit here and just tell you how to do this, or tell you how to live the Christian life, or tell you how to be a good man. And then if you see me out doing anything but you see me being that rude guy in the restaurant, or being a little bit, crude in a conversation, then I'm failing to lead by my example. And that, again, I think moves you really close, dangerously close to being a hypocrite. I remember I grew up, there was a guy, I was a young lawyer, and this guy used to say, "Ryan, do as I say, not as I do." Mm-hmm. And I always thought, man, I love you, but you're just every time you say that, you're just saying, look, I know what to do, but I can't do it, or I don't do it. That's not leadership. So I think at the end of the day, there's a great verse in Proverbs that talks about men leading other men. It says, and this is Proverbs 27:17. It says, "Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another." Mm-hmm. So it's not just all about me or all about you. If I am leading by my example, then I am influencing the people around me. And that's particularly, I think, important for us as men. We're going to be fathers, and I think the most important thing you can do for a child or for your wife is to set a great example of how to be a leader in the household, a leader in the community, a leader in the church, a leader in whatever you are doing. And a leader is not the person who stands up and their voice is louder than everybody else. It's the person who, and I think a lot of times that's not true. Some of the best leaders I've ever known were people who I trusted them because of their wisdom and their humble manner, not their ostentatious, obnoxiousness. So leadership is something that is you don't just try to be the biggest, baddest guy in the room. Like the manly man image, yes, that is a true image. But to me, a manly man is a man who is humble, a man who genuinely loves. He doesn't say that he loves other people. He actually does it. Mm-hmm. You can see it in the things that he says, that he does, and you can hear it in the things that he says. And, leadership to me is essentially, we could say that we follow God's example as well. God made the decision to instill men with free will. Now, what does that mean? It means that he gave men the ability to decide that he doesn't even exist. We've seen what free will can do here, in the last few years. You can decide, if you're a man, that you're not a man. You can do anything with your mind. Mm-hmm. I heard of a child recently who believes that she is an animal, and her school was forcing all the kids to just endure this while she barked at people as they went in and out of the school. Free will is a pretty crazy thing. That's not leading by example. I think leadership is attaining as best you can with all the energy that you can muster to that example that God set. And of course, God's primary example to us as men was Christ, the man. What brilliance for a God to choose to create a world and fill it with, several billion men and women, and then choose to come and be one of them, to be born among them and to walk among them, even though he's God, to, come and check it out, from our perspective, walk like we walk, do the things we do. who does that, right? That our God is the only God that ever did that. And, it was a stroke of brilliance. And he gave us an example to follow. You mentioned Christ crying. I got to say this. So, I'm going to admit here, I'm a man, but I cry more than you might realize. And I think it's because over the years, I have overcome, with God's help, a lot of the traps that men fall into. Arrogance. I was an arrogant man for many years. God helped me to move past that, I think. I was not an humble man. God has certainly helped me in that department. And over time, as I have taken the focus off myself and what I want and what I need, I experienced a lot less anger, for instance, because I'm now not angry all the time because I'm not getting my way. That's one of the reasons I don't have anger or problem with anger like a lot of people do. It's not all about me. And a lot of anger actually comes from fear. And fear is something else we'll talk a lot about, because a lot of people, men, women, children, all of us deal with fear. That's probably the biggest problem that most people face. But now I do, for instance, as a man, I think it's my responsibility to understand my emotions. I've got a chart, that has probably 100 emotions on it. And it shows by degrees how they tend to look like anger, how they tend to look like love, how they tend to look like joy. And now as I am going through life and something happens, I can check myself. Like you said, I've got sort of that check engine light. Anger is one of them, but there are others too. If I am feeling a certain way, I am able now to stop and say, why am I feeling this way? What's really happening here? And I think that's being a man. I think that's being a mature man. Mm-hmm. Just to be able to control my emotions, because we all have emotions. God made us with emotions. That's a gift. It's not a curse, and we just have to tame those emotions. And in order to do that, you have to actually think about it. It's not an automatic process. If people who are guided just by how they feel tend to make a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. People who tend to think about why they feel the way they do and manage that with some wisdom don't make nearly as many mistakes. And they actually have a few victories, that they can look back at and, realize that, they got some things right. I'm very good at getting things wrong, mm-hmm. and I don't like that feeling. I would very much rather get it right more of the time. And it takes a lot of thought, a lot of effort.
And so you said something there I think that is important, is emotions are not bad, and even controlling your emotions is a part of self-control. And so self-control is, I think, at the center of it, right? Can we experience these emotions, not let them drive our decision-making, not let them drive our... So a big part of his fears, like, understand it's okay to be fearful. My mm-hmm. brother would always say, it's okay to be fearful. That's where courage comes from. Mm-hmm. You just can't let it control you.
That's right.
And so that self-control piece, I think, is very important, because that's what Jesus demonstrated so perfectly in all his dealings, when he was falsely accused, when people said he did things that he did not do, when people lied about him in public, when they tested him, when he knew they were testing him, mm-hmm. and he knew they weren't getting it. He knew they weren't understanding why he was there, and he didn't get angry. Mm-hmm. He was in control of his emotions. He experienced them, though. And so that's the difference from just saying that no emotions are good, and if I don't feel this, I'm stronger, mm-hmm. right? And I think that's a misgiving. I think that's a lie, that if I don't feel, then I'm stronger.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of addiction. There are over 200 forms of recognized addictions, as I understand it. Addiction is more or less just the inability to cope with your reality. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really at the end of the day what it is, or malcoping, as I call it. And that a lot of people who are struggling with addiction say that they were trying not to feel what they were feeling. Mm-hmm. And I get that. I do. I get that. I mean, we all experience the uncomfortable feelings, but living life as a human being means we're going to have emotions, and the key to that game is to understand your emotions, to learn to identify the emotions you're feeling, and to learn how to properly channel those into doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Now there's a great verse you mentioned, being a model. Paul, the apostle that God sent to the Gentiles, to you and me, back right after Christ's crucifixion and his ascension to heaven. Paul wrote a lot of letters in the Bible. The New Testament's mostly letters from Paul to different people, and one of them is the letter to Titus. And in Titus chapter 2, verses 6 through 8, Paul wrote this. He said, "Likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us." Now, that's just one example of many places in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, where men are told that they need to be an example by the way they live their lives. And when it says, we'll be talking in our next episode about self-control and discipline, right? And we will talk about that at length. But being an example here, like for instance, if I am a hothead and I'm just eternally losing my control of myself because I'm an angry person, who all is going to want to be around me to hear what I have to say? Who is going to even believe what I say?
Not many.
Right? You lose all your credibility. If I am terrified that something's going to happen, I'm a worrier. I'm just constantly walking around complaining about how things, just aren't the way they should. Who is going to be drawn to that? Now compare that. What if I'm the guy that walks into the room and I am looking for the silver lining? Let's just say that I'm a part of a group and that group is enduring some kind of crisis. When you walk into a room like that, who are you looking for? You're looking for the people who are cool, calm, and collected, and seem to see a way through. That's just one example of how being a godly man puts you at the top of the list. It puts you at the top of the success list in terms of, being a leader in our society. And that is true even if people are in the group aren't Christian, or the group isn't a Christian group. You don't have to have that. In my experience, and I've been at it a while, people are always drawn to that person who exhibits control, self-control, and calmness, and they demonstrate wisdom. When you say somebody is wise, that to some degree is based on what they say, but I think more often it's based on what they do. So our actions really do matter, and there are a lot of people, particularly young men maybe, who think that they can do whatever they feel like doing, but they don't realize that their actions are speaking louder than words, and people are paying attention to that. Even the people who think you're cool or want, sort of egg you on to do certain things, there comes a point in time where that sort of falls away, and all of a sudden they're thinking about, the things they've done and what they want to do going forward. And that accountability comes along at some point, usually when you're turning the curve on between your 20s and your 30s. It starts to hit because you realize you're not a kid anymore.
Yeah. I think as we wrap up, I think I kind of want to finish with this thought of our discussion on that First Corinthians verse that we went over, like, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Kind of one of the questions one of the guys had, is a great question, is like, he asked, do you think it's a prideful thing to say, imitate me as I imitate Christ? Or do you think it can be something humble? And I think as we talked about it, it's like, okay, I think it can be something humble because Paul was able to say it. But I think it was definitely, for me included, it was more of a gut check of, okay, can I say that about myself? What is my motivation for wanting to develop these qualities of a strong man? Is it so that I can be powerful and manipulate people? Or is it so I can influence people and I can teach them what I've been taught, right? And so, I don't know, just going with it. Am I going to be the man? And as the discussion went on, it's like, okay, I don't have any kids yet, but I hope to in the future. And so, am I going to be the type of man that I would, if I have a boy, I would want him to be like me? And that's a gut check, because I don't think, I think in the past when I look back, I can say there's a time I was like, I don't want him to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can say honestly now, is like, I do want him to be like I am now.
Mm-hmm.
Not perfect, made mistakes, but someone who is trying to be more like Christ, is trying to develop these qualities so that whether it's a biological son, whether it's a younger believer, a younger man, anybody after me, just like an apprentice teaches somebody how to do a job,
Mm-hmm.
so we as men are to help anyone below us, around us, not below us in this, just younger than us, even by that, to help them be more like Christ. And I think as believers, that's different than in other areas. And so it's more of a servant's attitude, whereas
That's right.
as opposed to a power grab.
Yeah, that's what Jesus said. He said, if you want to be my disciples, you must lay down your life, take up your cross daily, and follow me. And when he says follow me, what did he show us to do? He said, they will know that you're my disciples by your love for one another. And I think if I go into anything that I do with love for the other person, then I'm safe from trying to manipulate or dominate them, which is what a lot of men think men are supposed to do, and to me that means I am to be respectful. I am to be courteous and kind, words that don't make it into a lot of leadership books, right? That we're reading nowadays. I think that does not mean that I am not to study and to learn everything that I can try to learn, just like we're talking about things that we've learned right now. A lot of life is learning. I used to tell people, I used to tell my mom before she passed away, Mom, you're in your 90s, but if you're learning, you're living, that we're eternally learning to be something better than we are. And as men, I think we need to learn from the hard lessons. You said, like I can, that, there was a time when I wasn't so proud of the man that I was. God, in his mercy, and I think in his love for me, moved me out of that. It was a very painful, difficult process, no doubt about it. Horrific, horrible at times. God has his way of doing things, but I can tell you this. There's a great verse that actually says, do not, and if I can lay my hands on it, let's see if I can find it. I may just bring it up when we talk in our next episode about self-discipline. But he says, do not be upset when God chastens you, because he chastens his sons. He chastens you because he loves you. And I, as a father now, I've raised two sons. They're 29 and 26, and they're young men now. And I didn't set the best example for them at all times, as I wish I had when they were growing up. But now, today, I am earnestly, diligently just trying to be a good man. I'm not doing it for their sake. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. I'm doing it because God, I think, has called me to do that, and he's just let me get to the point where I seem to see it more clearly. And by doing that, I know from what my sons say and the things that they do, I know that they are seeing that, they're witnessing that example. So I'll say this, it's never too late. If somebody's listening to us that's already, late in life or past the point of, of being able to say they're young, it is not too late. You can turn at any time. And it's never too late to entrust your life to God and to let God show you how to be a man. God is a God who gives chances. He gives chances. He called on Israel to repent right up until, he did it for 1,000 years, and then the New Testament opens up with that same message, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand, from John the Baptist. And then Christ, that was his message, repent, and the kingdom of God is at hand. That was his message. So, we always, with our God, have a chance to turn and to try to get it right. And so as men, I think it's a manly thing to say, look, I haven't been doing it right, and I need to turn. I think that's probably the most manly thing that a man can do.
And to actively turn. It doesn't, I was under the impression it just happens over time, but like if you don't change anything, nothing's going to change. If I just sit there and then wait until I turn 30 and then something's going to magically happen, it's not going to happen.
No, the day comes where you plant your feet and you say, from this point forward, I'm going to be a different kind of man.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that I think rounds us toward home. So let's wrap this episode up. And then next time we're going to talk about discipline. Well, that's it for this week. Manhood is a lot of things. While you think about all these spiritual strengths, remember that manhood is many things, and it takes some thought. So you might set aside some time just to sit around and ponder all this stuff. At the end of the day, true manhood, as God designed it, is a mind-blowing experience. The most manly attributes that a man can have are genuine humility, a big heart, love for his fellow man, and a firm faith in the one and true living God. So we will be talking more about that as we talk about self-discipline in our next episode. If you're on YouTube, be sure and hit that like button. While you're at it, subscribe and tap that bell button so you'll be the first to get our next episode. If you're listening on Spotify, be sure to follow us so you'll never miss an episode. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook. That's at reaching_up_podcast on Instagram, and reaching up on Facebook. Be sure and reach out to us if you'd like to have any comments or questions or any suggestions or feedback, or you have a particular question that you really need to talk to somebody about. Our address is contact@reachinguppodcast.com. That's contact@reachinguppodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.